Picture this. Sarah shows up to her company event only to find her seat replaced with a trash can. And if that's not enough, her boss, Oscar, goes a step further by tossing a dirty wet wipe straight at her. But just when things seem at their worst, Sarah's husband steps in, turning the whole situation on its head. The tables are about to turn, and you won't believe how. Stay tuned, this showdown is about to get very interesting. I think a trash can suits a piece of trash like you who steals discarded products. My wife's boss was clearly mocking her, his words dripping with ridicule. It was a company social event. In the place designated for my wife and me, a trash can was set up instead of chairs. "Hey, there's some trash lying here." While I was surprised by his words, he threw a dirty wet wipe he had used right at my wife's face. It missed her face, but grazed her shoulder and fell to the floor. Finally, I couldn't hold back any longer. I quickly picked up the wet wipe and threw it back at him. My name is Oscar Hall. The Hall family has been wealthy for generations, owning numerous properties in the state. I have a wife named Sarah, and I met her thanks to one of these properties. We met while volunteering at a food kitchen for children, which was based on a property I provided. We were attracted to each other there and eventually got married. By the way, Sarah continued working at her job even after we got married. She works for a local confectionery company named Sunshine Cookies. Sunshine Cookies provides leftover products to the children's food kitchen. And, not to hide anything, the CEO of Sunshine Cookies, Carl, was a classmate of mine in middle school, and we still keep in touch. When Carl started his current company, I bought shares as financial support. So, I'm a major shareholder of Sunshine Cookies, but I don't interfere with its management. Now, one day, Sarah told me something. A social event? Next Sunday?
That's right. Carl himself initiated it to promote more interaction by inviting other local businesses and residents. The idea had been discussed for a while, but it finally came to fruition.
Apparently, Carl was organizing a social event with local businesses and residents. When Sunshine Cookies started, it was just a small sweets manufacturer making and selling local souvenirs, but it has grown rapidly over the past decade and is now a publicly traded company. Carl believed that the company could grow this much thanks to the local residents who loved the store and the employees who supported it. And this event was planned as a small token of appreciation for that support. It's going to be lively, that's for sure. This is just like Carl. He's always loved organizing these kinds of events. Sarah smiled at my comment.
Carl loves seeing people having a good time. Yes, and we've been invited as special guests. The invitation arrived this morning.
Oh well, we should definitely go then. What about you? Do you have any duties on that day?
No, I haven't been asked to help, so I'll go with you.
And so, we arrived at the event day. It's great that the weather is nice.
Really?
The weather was perfect, and by the time we arrived at the venue, there was already a considerable crowd. All right, see you later.
Okay.
Afterward, I saw an acquaintance in the crowd and decided to go separate ways with Sarah for a while. However, about an hour later, when I headed to the guest table where we were supposed to meet, I saw Sarah standing by the table without sitting down. Her profile looked unusually stern and somewhat confused, unlike her usual bright and lively self. I wondered what was wrong. Puzzled by her unusual behavior, I squinted my eyes to get a better look. Then I noticed that where our seats were supposed to be, there were trash cans instead of chairs. Opposite the standing Sarah was a man in a suit with a nasty smirk, saying something to her. The atmosphere between them didn't seem good, so I hurried over. Soon, I heard the man say, "I think a trash can suits a piece of trash like you who steals discarded products." His words were full of ridicule, and he was clearly mocking Sarah. I was shocked by his harsh words, but Sarah responded calmly without getting angry.
Excuse me, but I am not a thief. Carl has approved donating discarded products to the children's food kitchen.
Hearing the words, children's food kitchen, I started to understand the situation. It seemed there was a misunderstanding about the discarded sweets sunshine cookies provided to the children's food kitchen. Even so, calling Sarah a thief was unacceptable, and I was about to step in with anger boiling inside me when I noticed a woman with a worried expression watching the exchange between the man and Sarah, just like me. She was wearing an employee ID from Sunshine Cookies around her neck. I decided to ask her about the man who was calling Sarah a thief. "Excuse me, who is that man sitting over there?" "Oh, I'm an acquaintance of Sarah. It looks like there's some trouble, and I'm concerned." Hearing that I was an acquaintance of Sarah seemed to ease her caution, and she responded with a complicated expression.
That man is Oscar, our company's finance manager. He's Carl's nephew. Well, he's a bit of a problem.
Oscar, Carl's nephew, used his position to harass his subordinates, especially young female employees. Sarah had warned him about his behavior, but Oscar held a grudge and started harassing Sarah. The thief accusation was just another of Oscar's baseless claims. The woman explained this to me with some hesitation.
I'm sorry, we should be the ones to reprimand Oscar, but we feel sorry for Sarah.
However, no one besides Sarah could stand up to him because he always flaunted his connection as the CEO's nephew. Just then, I heard Oscar's voice, laughing loudly as he hurled more insults at Sarah. "Hey, there's some trash lying here." Then he threw a dirty wet wipe he had used right at Sarah's face. Luckily, it only grazed Sarah's shoulder and fell to the ground. But I couldn't watch it any longer. I quickly picked up the fallen wet swipe and threw it back at Oscar.
Hey,
"Didn't you learn in kindergarten that trash goes in the trash can?" I said so, shielding the surprised Sarah and glaring at Oscar. The wet wipe I threw back grazed Oscar's cheek. His face turned red, and he kicked up his chair as he stood up and advanced toward me. "Hey, old man, what do you think you're doing?" But I stood firm, protecting Sarah behind me, and retorted, "That's what I want to ask you. What's the big idea of throwing trash at people? If you're so obsessed with trash, why don't you get a job at a waste management facility?" Oscar, clearly not expecting a comeback, widened his eyes in surprise for a moment. But he quickly twisted his face in anger and glared at me. "Old man, do you know who I am?" Oscar stomped his feet, yelling like a child. I watched his childish display with a sense of detachment, but another employee, who seemed to have heard the commotion, rushed over to Oscar with a panicked look and whispered to him, "This is Mr. Hall. You know, our major shareholder." "Huh? Major shareholder? Wait, you mean the major shareholder Hall?" At that moment, Oscar let out a high-pitched voice and, in his shock, collapsed into the chair behind him. His face turned pale as he muttered quietly, "How could it be?" Oscar, now murmuring like he was in a trance, looked between me and Sarah behind me. Confirming his suspicion, Sarah calmly stepped forward and spoke.
this is my husband.
"Nice to meet you. I'm Douglas, Sarah's husband. It seems Sarah has been quite troubled by you." As I said this, glaring at Oscar, he gulped in fear. "No way. I never thought she was the major shareholder. Since Hall is a common name, he probably never imagined Sarah was the wife of the major shareholder. Moreover, Sarah's personality wouldn't lead her to brag about being the major shareholder's wife, so only a few veteran employees knew we were married. But regardless of which Hall she was, it didn't justify his terrible insults. Staring directly at Oscar, who still looked pale, I spoke up. "Oh, by the way, I have a friend who runs a waste management facility, and coincidentally, I just met him here at this event. He mentioned they were short-staffed and could use some help. Should I recommend you?" "What?" Oscar's eyes widened at my pointed remark. But even though he was shaken, he stubbornly continued to yell like a spoiled child. "Just because you're a major shareholder doesn't mean you can throw your weight around. You can't interfere with company personnel decisions." I was dumbfounded by his claim. It was too late for him to try and act righteous now. I suppressed a sigh and nodded slightly. "Well, that's true." Even as a shareholder, It would be overstepping to interfere with company personnel decisions, I agree. But you know what? I paused and fixed my gaze on Oscar. A frightened squeal escaped his throat. I am a shareholder of this company. As a shareholder, I will make a proper suggestion. It's up to him to decide what to do, I said quietly, and then shifted my gaze behind Oscar. He turned to look over his shoulder, as if pulled by an invisible force. Standing there was Carl, the CEO of Sunshine Cookies, looking furious. Uncle Carl, calling out to Carl in a shaky voice. Oscar seemed to lose all strength and slumped to the ground, unable to sit in the chair. Carl glared at his nephew with an intensity that far surpassed mine. Were you harassing Sarah, of all people? What have you done? But I didn't know this old lady, Ms. Hall, was the wife of the major shareholder. Tearfully, Oscar continued to make excuses, which I found oddly impressive. If only he could use that persistence for something more productive. However, his excuses were useless against his uncle. Carl grabbed his nephew by the collar and yelled at close range. Do you know that Sarah is the savior of our company? Carl then began to passionately talk about Sarah. This was a story from before I met Sarah. Driven by a desire to revitalize the local industry, Carl quit his job and used all his savings to start his company, Sunshine Cookies. But at that time, his marketing efforts were unsuccessful, and despite the good taste, customers didn't come. Sunshine Cookies fell into financial trouble. They had to discard a large number of products displayed in the store, and it was during this difficult time that Sarah, who was working as a clerk, suggested to Carl. She proposed donating the unsold sweets to a volunteer group that ran a food kitchen for children. Carl thought it was a great idea. Disposing of the products costs money, and if his company's sweets could contribute to society, it would be even better. At that time, Carl didn't know that I was involved with that volunteer group. So when I introduced Sarah as my wife, Carl was very surprised. And we were all grateful for the strange connection that brought the three of us together. After Sarah's suggestion, Sunshine Cookies started donating the unsold sweets. One day, local media featured their activities on their channel. The report highlighted the company's social contributions and its deepening ties with the local community. It was a well-put-together, 5-minute segment that conveyed Carl's good character. An influencer from the local area, who happened to see the program, was deeply impressed and shared Sunshine Cookies' activities and products on their account in a way that appealed to the younger generation. True to modern times, it quickly went viral. Eventually, Sunshine Cookies' activities were featured on a national information program. As a result, Sunshine Cookies' recognition and favorability skyrocketed, and they began receiving orders for sweets from all over the country. The sweets were already delicious. Customers who ordered out of curiosity were pleasantly surprised by the taste, and Sunshine Cookies' name spread further by word of mouth. A year later, in the Best Sweets and Snacks for Souvenirs ranking organized by a famous travel guidebook, Sunshine Cookies proudly took the top spot in the Eastern region. Do you understand? The reason we can even hold this event now is all thanks to Sarah's suggestion. Carl said this with a deep sense of appreciation, and Sarah, standing beside me, gave a wry smile. This story was actually Carl's favorite to tell when he was drunk. At our wedding, Carl cried while giving this speech as the friend of the groom, and it was quite a challenge to calm him down. Despite Sarah's repeated pleas of, "Please stop, it's embarrassing," Carl never listened, so she has given up by now. After finishing his recounting of the story to his nephew, Carl let out a big sigh as if emptying his lungs. Your mother begged me to hire you. She said you kept getting fired no matter where you went, and she wanted me to help you. So, I reluctantly took you in. I had heard once about the rocky relationship between Carl and his sister. When Sunshine Cookies was struggling, she barely responded to his calls. But as soon as the company started doing well, she began visiting him frequently, acting like a concerned relative. Carl couldn't completely reject his sister despite her neglect, and she took advantage of his kindness by pushing her incompetent son onto him. Uncle Carl, please stop. Not here. Embarrassed and frustrated by being called out in front of many company employees, Oscar's face turned red again as he shouted. But Carl, ignoring his nephew's feelings, yelled at him. Shut up. Even someone as reckless as you can at least apologize to Sarah and Douglas, can't you? Oh. Oscar, after hearing his uncle's words, glanced around briefly before finally lowering his head in resignation. Then, in a voice barely audible, he apologized to us. I'm sorry. I apologize as well. My nephew has behaved very rudely, and I'm truly sorry. As Carl looked at his nephew with resignation and also apologized, Sarah and I hurried to stop him.
It's fine. Yes, Oscar's behavior is problematic, but I didn't correct him just to force an apology.
You heard her. Carl, it's okay. As long as we aren't treated unfairly, that's enough for us. Guys. Finally, Carl stopped apologizing at our urging, a crumpled smile forming on his face, and he said, "Thank you." He then turned to the gathered crowd, apologized to them, and brightly announced to change the atmosphere. Everyone, I apologize for the disturbance caused by our internal matters. Today, at our merchandise booth, we are giving away one of Sunshine Cookies' most popular cookies for free to each person. Please stop by and take one as a souvenir for today. With his round face beaming like a cookie, Carl's warm smile spread to the previously restless crowd, making them smile as well. It's true that Sarah's suggestion may have been the turning point for Sunshine Cookies' growth. But it's because of Carl's wonderful personality and smile that his employees have followed him, and this charm has naturally reached the consumers, leading to today's success. Watching Carl surrounded by people, I felt fortunate to have such a good friend.
I'll go help with the merchandise booth.
No, Sarah, you're a guest today. Carl shook his head at Sarah's eager words. But my wife, already full of energy, gave a lively thumbs up and said, "Leave it to me.
I'm part of Sunshine Cookies too."
Then I'll help with stocking the shelves. Carl panicked when I suggested that, claiming that if the main shareholder began filling shelves, the other staff would develop ulcers. In the end, with the CEO himself doing the promotions and the major shareholder couple handling the stocking and customer service, the merchandise booth was bustling until the event ended. Meanwhile, Oscar, left behind, seemed to have lost the will to do anything. He slumped in a corner of the venue, looking as if he had merged with the trash can, shrinking smaller and smaller. Now, about what happened afterward. I heard this from Sarah later, but the day after the event, still buzzing with excitement, an astonishing fact about Oscar was discovered in the company. Apparently, he had been misappropriating company funds for personal use by abusing his position as the finance manager. A subordinate of Oscar, with incriminating data as evidence, had blown the whistle to Carl. According to the subordinate, since Oscar became manager, he had been a terrible boss, making absurd mistakes and not doing any work, causing significant hardship. Considering his behavior at the event, this wasn't surprising. The subordinate had tolerated it because Oscar was the CEO's nephew, but after the event, he realized that Carl wasn't entirely on Oscar's side. It also became clear that Oscar didn't have as much power as he claimed. That's why the subordinate decided to blow the whistle, and Carl, shocked that his nephew had resorted to embezzlement, took charge of the investigation. As evidence of Oscar's misconduct began to surface, it became apparent that he either underestimated the scrutiny or was overly confident that he wouldn't be caught. The investigation quickly confirmed his guilt. As a result, Oscar was stripped of his position and reassigned to the waste disposal department. However, even there, he proved to be incompetent. He miscalculated disposal estimates, shredded documents that shouldn't have been shredded, and ultimately broke the machine by pressing the wrong buttons. His incompetence became intolerable, and after discussions at the site, Oscar was eventually reassigned as a cleaner, handling tasks like pest control in the warehouse. I think he should consider himself lucky he wasn't fired outright, but how Oscar feels about his new role is unknown. Nevertheless, both Sarah and I hope that he would reflect on his actions and make a fresh start, understanding his uncle's kind intentions. Speaking of waste, our volunteer work at the Children's Food Kitchen continues. Since we married late, we don't have children of our own. but we want to ensure that the children who come here can eat their fill without any worries. Watching them enjoy the warm meals and sunshine cookies as sweets with smiles on their faces gives us a sense of fulfillment. Both Sarah and I renewed our commitment to supporting this activity that brought us together through such a unique connection.